Subscribe to the channel and comment below which SCP story you want to hear next. And don't forget to hit the bell for more stories like this.
This is Administrator, redacted, acting under my own authority, creating what will be my final, unredacted testament. The archives will show my death as a quiet, fading, a peaceful end to a long life of service. That is a lie, one of many I have had to author. The truth is, I am being consumed, not by age, but by the sheer, crushing weight of the secrets I have carried. For decades, we have secured, we have contained, we have protected, building this foundation on a bedrock of necessary fictions. But there is one truth that was never entered into any file, one anomaly whose true nature was deemed too corrosive for even the O5 Council to bear. They know of the entity, of course. They authorized its containment, but they do not know the context, the true reason for the fear. I am speaking of the subject designated SCP-049, our plague doctor. There is a profound and terrible irony in dedicating one's entire existence to building a fortress of logic and reason, a bulwark to shield humanity from the things that lurk in the dark, only to find the deepest horror is not a creature that crawls, but an idea that walks in broad daylight. This is the truth of the Doctor. His anomaly is not just his lethal touch or his profane surgeries, it is his philosophy. He speaks of the pestilence not as the historical plague we know, but as a fundamental flaw in the human condition itself, a sickness he, and only he, can see in every living person he meets, a corruption he feels divinely ordained to cure with his calm, methodical, and absolute lethality. The foundation was built upon the principle that what we do not understand can and will destroy us. We catalog the impossible, we imprison the paradoxical, and we study the incomprehensible so that the rest of the world can live in the placid illusion of normality that we so carefully manufacture for them. Every object, every entity, every anomaly we hold is a testament to our success, a piece of a puzzle that, even if it doesn't fit, we can at least isolate from the larger picture. But the Doctor, he is not a puzzle piece. He is the hand that sweeps the board clean, forcing us to question if the picture we were assembling ever made sense in the first place. I have grown old in this chair, haunted by the echoes of my own commands across the decades. I have watched good men march to their deaths to contain nightmares that defy description. I have signed the death warrants for entire worlds contained within a single room, all in the name of the greater good. I have shouldered the burden of knowing that the collective sanity of our species rests upon our ability to lie more convincingly than the anomalous truth. Yet, of all the terrible decisions, of all the necessary sacrifices, the containment of SCP-049 is the one that truly eroded my soul, not because of what he is, but because of what he represents, the terrifying possibility that he is right. His official file describes him as a humanoid entity of unknown origin with anomalous properties. This is a simplification so gross it borders on heresy. He is a walking, talking philosophical crisis, a question in the shape of a man that has haunted us since the day we found him on those muddy, God-forsaken streets in rural France. He moves with a grace that is not of this era. He speaks with an eloquence that can silence a room of hardened soldiers, and he operates with a single-minded conviction that can shatter the faith of the most resolute men. We lock him in a standard humanoid containment cell, but that is like trying to imprison a worldview in a steel box. We can contain the vessel, but his idea, his mission, that leaked out long ago. I remember the early debates in the newly formed O5 Council. We were younger then, more arrogant in our purpose. We truly believed the universe was a grand clockwork mechanism that, with enough effort, we could disassemble, study, and understand piece by piece. SCP-049 was the first time we encountered a gear that not only refused to fit, but actively mocked the very concept of the machine. Some of us, the more pragmatic members, argued for his immediate termination. They reasoned that any entity that kills with a touch and desecrates the dead was an absolute evil, a cancer that required excision, not study. There was no room for debate or sentiment. My faction, however, argued for patience. I insisted on study. In him, I saw not just a threat, but a potential source of forbidden knowledge, a key to unlocking mysteries about life, death, and the universe that we hadn't even conceived of yet. My curiosity, our collective scientific hubris, won the day. We chose the path of understanding over the path of destruction. Now, in the twilight of my life, I find myself wondering if we made the wrong choice. Perhaps true wisdom was not in trying to comprehend the doctor, but in recognizing the absolute darkness he represented and simply extinguishing it without a second thought. But we wanted answers, and each answer we found only deepened the horror. The cure he speaks of is the absolute antithesis of life. It is not a simple reanimation, a zombification that our own scientists have attempted and failed to replicate in their own morbid experiments. The creatures he produces, the instances of SCP-049-2, are hollow shells, biological automatons driven by the most rudimentary and grotesque programming. They possess no memory, no personality, none of the spark that we would define as consciousness or a soul. Yet the doctor, in his calm and terrifying sincerity, refers to each one as a success, a patient finally cleansed of the pestilence. In every one of his successes, we see our own most profound failure, the inability to protect life from a threat that believes it is saving it. I interviewed him myself in the first weeks of his captivity. The full, unedited recording was sealed by my direct order, classified beyond even the O5s. I sat in a sterile room, separated from him by a thick sheet of explosion-proof glass, and I spoke with the entity for several hours. He was unfailingly polite, articulate, and seemed genuinely curious about our methods, our foundation's purpose. He spoke to me as a colleague, another man of science, though his science was born of an age and a reality we could not begin to fathom. He spoke of the pestilence with an almost religious fervor, describing it not as a pathogen, but as a spiritual corruption, a fundamental dissonance in the soul that only he could perceive. The true terror of that conversation did not come from his word, but from the placid, unassailable logic that underpinned them. This is not a slavering beast or a cackling madman. He is an intellectual. He is a philosopher who wields a scalpel. He argued his position with a chilling clarity that left me, for the first time in my life, utterly without a response. He asked me why we cling so desperately to this fragile, imperfect, suffering-filled state we call life. He accused us, the Foundation, of being the true villains of the story, for perpetuating the sickness by protecting the sick, which, in his worldview, was every single one of us. I left that room shaken to my core, not by my fear of him, but by the fear of the seed of doubt he had planted. His ceramic mask, with its long and grotesque beak, has become an icon within the Foundation's culture. For the junior researchers, it is the face of a classic monster. For the security personnel, it is a target to be watched. But for me, and the very few who know the full story, it is a mirror, a dark, polished mirror that reflects our own scientific arrogance. We look at him, and we choose to see a deranged medieval cosplayer because the alternative, that he is exactly what he claims to be, and that we are the ones who are blind, is simply too monstrous to contemplate. The mask may hide his face, but it lays bare the absolute limits of our own understanding. Decades have now passed since his capture. The doctor remains in his cell, occasionally making polite, formal requests for new patients or for laboratory materials to continue his work. These requests are, of course, systematically and perpetually denied. He spends his days writing in his thick leather-bound journals, filling them with a script that seems to be a mix of medieval French, Latin, and symbols that our best linguists and cryptographers have never been able to decipher. He is one of our oldest prisoners, and he remains our greatest and most unsettling enigma. His containment is a daily ritual, a piece of theater we perform to convince ourselves that we are in control. And that is why I am making this recording. because the current special containment procedures, as robust as they appear on paper, are founded upon a dangerously flawed premise. They were designed to contain a man, a physical entity with a lethal touch. They were not designed to contain what he truly is, the full truth of his discovery of what we found in that village and what we were forced to do to cover our tracks was buried under layers of omega-level classification and disinformation. I am the last living member of the original council that made those decisions. And before the pestilence of time and forgetfulness claims me, the true account must be set down, not for the archives, not even for the council, but for whoever comes after me, so that they understand. The official story of his discovery is a clean and efficient fabrication. It speaks of field agents investigating reports of an anomalous humanoid in a remote area. It details a swift and successful containment operation with minimal, acceptable losses. It is all a lie, a necessary lie, crafted to maintain morale and preserve the fragile sanity of our own personnel. The truth is a chaotic mess of panic, blood, and a creeping, existential horror that challenged our very understanding of reality. The truth began not with a report from our agents, but with a sudden, deafening silence, the silence of the small, isolated village of Montplot in the French Pyrenees, which had abruptly ceased all communication with the outside world. In those nascent days of the Foundation, our intelligence networks were far less sophisticated than they are today. The information trickled in first as rumor, whispers from travelers and merchants about a cursed village. They spoke of a phantom doctor with the beak of a bird who walked the streets, and of silent, shadowed figures who followed him like a macabre honor guard. The local authorities dismissed it as folklore, a bout of mass hysteria likely caused by an outbreak of ergotism from tainted rye. But we, in our new and clandestine organization, had already learned to listen to such tales. Folklore is often the scarred memory of an encounter with the anomalous, and the silence of an entire town was a scream too loud for us to ignore. The first team we dispatched was not a mobile task force, not as we know them now. It was a preliminary reconnaissance and investigation team, 4 researchers and a small security escort of 6 men. They were led by Dr. Arnold, a brilliant man and a personal friend of mine. He was a devout skeptic, a man of science who believed that every anomaly, no matter how bizarre, could eventually be deconstructed and explained. He left for Montplot with the confident air of a man about to debunk a local legend. His final radio transmission, fragmented and warped by static, still echoes in my nightmares. He wasn't screaming, he was whispering in a tone of horrified awe. It's not a man, it's a principle. Oh God, the pestilence, it's in us. We lost all contact immediately after that. For 48 agonizing hours, there was nothing but static. Our operational doctrines were still being forged in the fires of necessity. A decision was made at the highest level. Send a second team, this time equipped for a fight, a proto-MTF unit armed with the best conventional weaponry we possessed at the time. Their mission was clear: ascertain the fate of Arnold's team, assess the nature of the threat, and if possible, contain the source of the anomaly. What they walked into was a scene of clinical carnage, a tableau of horror painted with the steady, precise hand of a master artist. The village of Montplot was silent, but it was far from empty. The initial reports from the second team, led by a hardened veteran named Moreau, described the scene with a professional detachment that barely concealed their shock. The streets were deserted, the houses left open to the elements, but inside the old stone church at the village center, they found the doctor's work. The bodies of nearly every villager were laid out on the pews and across the floor. They were not merely dead. Each one had been subjected to a grotesque and invasive form of surgery. Chests were cracked open, organs had been rearranged or replaced, and limbs were sutured into new, non-functional configuration. Beside each body lay the surgeon's improvised tools, sharpened shards of metal, glass, and animal bone. It was a slaughterhouse that aspired to be a laboratory. It was amidst this desecrated sanctuary that the team finally found him. He was not hiding. He was at work, hunched over what they recognized as the body of one of Dr. Arnold's security officers. He turned to face the armed team without any sign of haste or alarm. His presence, the survivors later reported, was overwhelming. It filled the cavernous space with a palpable sense of antiquity and absolute purpose. He greeted them politely in an antiquated form of French, wiping his bloodied hands on his dark robe. He introduced himself as a physician and stated that he was in the process of eradicating the great pestilence from this place. He then offered his services to the team, claiming he could sense the disease in them as well, still dormant, but undeniably present. The team's commander, Moreau, attempted to follow protocol, trying to establish a dialogue and demanding the entity's surrender. The doctor simply tilted his head, as if the command was a linguistic curiosity, a concept he could not quite grasp. "But of course not, good sir," he replied, his voice calm and resonant through the church. "My work here is not yet complete. There are still so many to be cured." It was then that the other bodies, the operated villagers, began to stir. Dozens of them. They rose slowly, silently, with jerky, unnatural movements. They were not the raging zombies of fiction. They were empty puppets of flesh, hollow and obedient, their eyes vacant. The ensuing panic was immediate and absolute. The team opened fire on both the doctor and the reanimated creatures. Bullets tore through the bodies of the villagers with wet, slapping sounds, dropping some, but others continued their slow, inexorable advance, seemingly indifferent to wounds that would have felled any living man. Against the doctor himself, the bullets seemed even less effective. They struck him, tearing his robes, but he did not flinch or react, as though the sensation of such violence was simply irrelevant to his grand purpose. It was then that he began to move towards them, not to attack, but to approach, with one hand calmly outstretched. The first soldier he touched died instantly. There was no struggle, no sound, not even a cry of pain. The man simply collapsed, his body going limp as if his strings had been cut. Chaos erupted. The team's fire discipline shattered in the face of a weapon they could not comprehend or counter. A single touch. That was all it took. Moreau screamed the order to fall back, to retreat from the church, as his men were overwhelmed by the slow, shambling advance of the silent horde and the calm, walking death that was the doctor. They lost 3 more men before they could stumble back out into the village streets, only to find their nightmare had just begun. The creatures, the first instances of what we would come to designate SCP-049-2, did not pursue them with speed, but with a terrifying, implacable persistence. They shambled out of the church and began to spread through the village, moving with a silent, horrifying purpose. Moreau's team realized they were not fighting a single monster, but a process, a slow-motion conversion of an entire populace. The doctor himself merely watched them from the church doorway, not like a predator observing its prey, but like a disappointed academic, saddened that they would so violently resist his generosity. It was the report of this calm, this utter lack of malice, that I found most disturbing. The team managed to barricade themselves inside the village's small municipal building and re-establish radio contact. Moreau's voice was strained, but his professionalism held. He relayed the facts, the lethal touch, the reanimated puppets, the futility of their conventional firearms. He requested new orders, but what he was truly asking for was a solution to an impossible problem. How do you fight an enemy you cannot touch? How do you contain a threat whose very biology defies everything you know? In that moment, back at headquarters, we faced our first true existential crisis as an organization. Our understanding of the anomalous world was infantile, and Montplot was our most brutal lesson. The debate that raged within the council chamber was frantic and desperate. Our options were limited, and all of them were terrible. We could abandon the team and attempt to quarantine the entire valley indefinitely, hoping the anomaly would burn itself out. We could authorize an overwhelming assault with heavy explosives, leveling the village, but risking the uncontained release of the entity into the countryside. Or we could attempt a new, untested method of containment, something we had never tried before. It was in that moment of desperation that the very concept of specialized containment was born, not from careful planning, but from the raw necessity of surviving SCP-049. While we deliberated, the situation in Montplo continued to deteriorate. Moreau reported that the creatures were testing their barricades, not with intelligence, but with mindless, constant pressure. They would throw themselves against the doors and walls, silently, for hours on end. Worse, the doctor had resumed his work. The team could see him from the windows, dragging the bodies of their own fallen comrades back towards the church. That act of profanation, the conversion of our soldiers into his mindless automata, was a devastating psychological blow. Moreau's pleas became more urgent. He needed a decision, any decision. It was then that I made what was, at the time, the most difficult decision of my career. I authorized Experimental Containment Protocol Alpha. In essence, we gave Moreau and his surviving men carte blanche and access to our most theoretical resources. We dispatched helicopters to airdrop specialized equipment, including the first prototypes of high-potency aerosol sedatives and containment netting woven from experimental alloys. Their mission was no longer to assess and contain. It was now to capture at any cost. Their lives were now secondary to the goal of taking the entity alive. I sacrificed their safety for the chance to understand the monster we were facing. The capture operation was a heroic disaster. Using the aerosol agents, they managed to slow the reanimated villagers enough to entangle them in the nets, immobilizing them. But the doctor himself seemed completely immune to the chemical agents. He walked through the thick, sedative fog as if it were a pleasant morning mist, his purpose unwavering. Moreau, in a final act of incredible bravery and desperation, used himself as bait to lure the doctor into a trap. His men prepared a heavy, reinforced containment cage that had been airdropped, positioning it to be dropped from the roof of a building. The plan was crude, almost suicidal, and it worked. Moreau successfully drew the doctor's attention. The entity pursued him across the village square, not with rage, but with that same calm, medical purpose. "Do not run, my child," the radio crackled with the doctor's voice. "The cure can be so swift." Moreau led him directly into the kill zone beneath the suspended cage. At the last possible second, he dove to the side, and the order was given. The heavy steel cage crashed down, imprisoning SCP-049. There was a moment of stunned silence over the radio. They had done it. The anomaly was trapped, but the cost was absolute. Moreau had been touched. His final act was to secure the capture of the thing that had killed him. With the primary entity contained, the entire dynamic of the situation shifted. The SCP-049 two instances, without the directing presence of the doctor, became completely passive. They ceased their relentless pressure and simply stood in place like fleshy statues, awaiting a command that would never again come. The containment teams were able to move in and secure every specimen, both the former villagers and our own fallen men. The village of Montplo was finally truly silent, but the echo of what had happened there would resonate through the halls of the Foundation forever. We had our prize, but we also had a terrible, unmanageable secret. The next problem was one of information. What to do about the village and the truth. We could not explain the disappearance of an entire town of French citizens. We could not admit to the world, or even our own governments, the existence of an entity like the doctor. The cover-up that followed was the most complex and comprehensive we had ever attempted. We fabricated a story about a catastrophic, localized landslide, one that not only destroyed the village, but buried it so completely under rock and earth that any recovery attempt would be impossible. We had to forge geological surveys, news reports, and eyewitness accounts. We had to erase Montplo from the map. This was the Foundation's first use of amnestics on such a massive societal scale. We began to treat memory itself as a contagion that needed to be contained and eradicated. Field agents were dispatched to every neighboring town, to every known living relative of the villagers, to every government clerk who had a record of Montplot's existence. We administered forgetfulness in carefully calculated doses, rewriting the personal histories of hundreds of people to excise the inconvenient truth of the village. It was an act of massless, psychological violence justified by us as a necessary evil to protect the fragile sanity of the world at large. Internally, the story was also sanitized for our own protection. The full, terrifying details of what Moreau's team faced were redacted or omitted from the official reports. The doctor's calm intelligence and his philosophical statements were classified as nonsensical, anomalous vocalizations, minimizing his nature. We deliberately reframed him in the files as a simpler, more comprehensible monster, making him easier for our staff to hate and fear. We did this to protect the psyche of our own researchers, to allow them to study him without having to confront the same existential crisis that I had. We contained him not only with steel, but with censorship. The transport of SCP-049 from the containment site to our first secure facility was an operation of absolute tension. He remained perfectly calm and cooperative within his transport cage. He spoke to his captors, inquiring about their destination and making polite inquiries about their general health. Most of the guards refused to speak, rightfully terrified. One of them, a young man who was either brave or foolish, engaged him in a brief conversation about his family. By the end of the journey, that guard had to be placed on psychological watch. He couldn't stop thinking about the pestilence. The doctor's words, we learned, were a vector of infection, just as potent as his touch. The arrival of SCP-049 at Site 19 marked the beginning of a new era for the Foundation. He was our first truly sentient, cooperative, and yet philosophically hostile humanoid anomaly. He forced us to rapidly develop new protocols for interviews, new methods of psychological containment, and new ethical frameworks to grapple with the questions he posed just by existing. He was not merely an object to be locked in a box. He was a catalyst that fundamentally shaped our organization. He taught us, in the most brutal way imaginable, that physical containment was only the first and perhaps the easiest layer of a much deeper, more insidious problem. Our initial scientific analysis of the entity was an exercise in pure frustration. Our instruments could not penetrate his robes, which appeared to be an integrated part of his body, like a turtle's shell. Blood and tissue samples, when we could acquire them, were inconclusive, revealing a biological structure that corresponded to nothing in the known tree of life. He looked human, he sounded human, but every test we ran only confirmed that he was something else entirely, something ancient and alien to our understanding of biology. Science, our most trusted tool, failed us again and again. Our only source of information was the doctor himself, and to trust him was to walk a path towards madness. I personally oversaw the design of his first permanent containment cell. It was a process haunted by paranoia. How do you truly contain an entity whose mere touch is death? The obvious solution was distance and remote interaction, but we also had to contend with his constant polite requests for a laboratory, for biological materials, for corpses, so that he might continue his studies. We denied these requests, of course, but his sheer persistence was unsettling. He never asked for freedom. He only asked for the tools of his trade. His identity was so completely intertwined with his perceived mission that captivity was, to him, merely a logistical inconvenience, a temporary delay in his life's great work. The reanimated creatures we recovered from Montplot, the SCP-049-2 instances, were studied exhaustively. Their physiology was a biological nightmare. They did not require food, water, or sleep. Their bodies continued to function via some unknown process, powered by the strange alchemical fluids the doctor had injected into them. Autopsies revealed that he did not simply kill and reanimate them, he fundamentally transformed them at a cellular level, rewriting their biology to serve a new and terrible purpose. They were living monuments to his philosophy, walking, shambling proof of his cure. Each one was a testament to his success and a grave marker for our failure. The guilt over what we did to the memory of Montplot weighs on me to this day. It was our original sin. It was the act that taught us that to protect humanity, we would sometimes have to sacrifice parts of it, and not just lives, but memories, histories, truths. We became the guardians not of reality, but of a carefully curated and edited version of it. And SCP-049 was our first and most brutal editor. He showed us a truth about the universe that we could not accept, and so we chose to erase the sentence rather than try to understand the words. It was a decision that defined the very path our foundation would walk for the next century. And so, the Doctor became a legend within our own walls, a campfire story told to frighten new recruits to following procedure. But for me, he was never a story. He is a constant, living reminder of our profound ignorance, a lonely figure in a steel room that contains more secrets than any other object in our vast and terrible collection. He waits patiently, writing in his indecipherable journals, utterly convinced of his own righteousness, while we, on the outside, maintain the grand pretense of control. This is the burden I carry, the knowledge that our greatest protection against him is our own deliberate, fearful refusal to truly listen to what he has to say. The initial fear following his capture was unlike anything we had ever experienced. It was not the simple, primal fear of a predator, but a creeping intellectual dread. His influence spread not like a plague, but like a whisper, infecting the minds of the very guards and researchers assigned to him. Men who had faced down horrors that could tear them limb from limb would return from a shift guarding his cell, looking pale and shaken, not because of what he did, but because of what he might have said. The idea of the pestilence became a contagion in itself, a seed of doubt planted in the most secure facility on Earth. We had contained the man, but we had inadvertently brought his philosophy inside our own walls, and it began to fester immediately. One of the first things we did was perform an autopsy on Commander Moreau. It was a grim, silent affair conducted in our most secure medical bay. We expected to find some exotic toxin, some microscopic biological agent, some evidence of the weapon he used. We found nothing, absolutely nothing. Medically, Moreau was in perfect health, aside from the fact that he was dead. There was no discernible cause of death. His heart had simply stopped. All cellular activity had ceased in an instant. It was as if his body's fundamental command to live had been deleted. This discovery was more terrifying than any poison. It meant his touch didn't kill you in a biological sense. It simply and absolutely turned you off. It was in this atmosphere of profound ignorance and fear that the official designation was born. He was entered into our burgeoning catalog as SCP-049. The first draft of his containment document was a testament to our confusion. It was filled with redactions, not to hide information, but because we had no information to give. Cause of death, unknown. Anatomical details, unknown. True capabilities, unknown. We were documenting our own failure to comprehend. The procedures were crude, based on pure paranoia. Maintain a distance of no less than 10 meters. No physical contact under any circumstances. All personnel to undergo psychological screening after every shift. It was the birth of a doctrine written in fear. A decision was made to construct a dedicated research and containment wing just for him. The cost was astronomical, but the alternative, keeping him in our general population, was deemed an unacceptable risk. We could not allow his philosophical contagion to spread to other staff, or worse, to other sentient anomalies. This act segregated him, turning him into a special case, a problem so unique it required its own ecosystem of containment. It was a turning point for the Foundation. We were no longer simply collecting and storing monsters in jars. We were now building bespoke prisons for ideas, for entities that challenge the very definition of life and sanity. We were becoming something more complex and more compromised. I look back at that decision as the moment our innocence was truly and irrevocably lost. Before SCP-049, our mission felt clearer, purer. We found things that broke the laws of physics, and we put them in a box to keep people safe. But after him, we knew we were also in the business of fighting concepts. How do you put a concept in a box? How do you secure, contain, and protect the world from a question that, once asked, can never be unasked? His arrival forced us to mature at a painful rate, to develop the callous, pragmatic, and often cruel methodologies that define us today. He was the fire in which our modern protocols were forged, and we carry the scars of that burning. Our initial experiments were cautious, non-invasive probes into his nature. We exposed him to a battery of stimuli, attempting to elicit any reaction that might give us a clue. We showed him images of war, of beauty, of complex mathematical formulas. We played him music from every culture and era. We exposed him to samples of the world's most virulent pathogens, Ebola, Marburg, smallpox, thinking his obsession with disease might be triggered. His reaction was always the same, a calm, dismissive patience. He would politely observe, then state that while these things were unfortunate, they were merely symptoms, distractions from the true malady, the great pestilence that he alone was equipped to fight. We turned our attention to the black leather bag he carried, which he refers to simply as his instruments. He allowed us to study it, a strange gesture of professional courtesy. The tools within were a surgeon's nightmare and a metallurgist's paradox. Scalpels, clamps, and needles made from metals that did not correspond to any known element on Earth. They were impossibly sharp and showed no signs of wear. The bag itself seemed to generate new tools as needed, its internal dimensions greater than the exterior. The fluids he used for his surgeries were even more confounding, a complex, self-replicating protein chain that actively broke down and rewrote the genetic code of any biological tissue it touched. These findings ignited a firestorm within the O5 Council. The debate over his fate became the central, defining conflict of our early years. The exterminators, their position now bolstered by the sheer alien nature of his biology and tools, argued more forcefully than ever for his termination. They saw him not just as a monster, but as a potential vector for an alien biology that could rewrite our entire ecosystem. They claimed that to study him was to risk unpacking a Pandora's box from which we could never recover, and that our primary duty was to eliminate such an existential threat, not coddle it in a lab. I, leading the academic faction, countered that his termination would be the single greatest mistake in the Foundation's history. To destroy him would be to destroy our only source of information on this alternate biology, this impossible science. He was a living Rosetta Stone for a reality that operated on different rules. Yes, he was dangerous, but the knowledge he possessed, the nature of the pestilence, the secrets of his instant death touch, the composition of his tools, could be the key to understanding life, consciousness, and perhaps even developing our own anomalous technologies for the protection of humanity. To kill him, I argued, would be an act of galactic-level vandalism. A third faction, the pragmatists, cared little for the philosophical debate. They were concerned only with stability and security. They pointed out that we had no confirmed way to terminate him. What if we tried and failed, only succeeding in making him hostile? What if his death triggered some unknown contingency, a dead man's switch that released the pestilence on a global scale? They argued for the only logical path: build a perfect, permanent box, study him from a safe distance, learn what we can, but prioritize absolute, fail-safe containment above all else. Their position was one of caution, of risk management, and in the end, it was the one that held the most sway over the fearful council. This led to the agonizing debate over his object class. On the surface, he was cooperative, predictable, and his location was known. This would typically warrant a safe classification. However, his lethal touch represented an unstoppable, instant death vector, and his ideas were a virulent info hazard that could corrupt personnel with mere conversation. These properties screamed, Keter. We were deadlocked for weeks. To classify him as safe was to dangerously underestimate his true nature. To classify him as Keter felt like an admission of failure, an overreaction to an enemy who, for the moment, was sitting calmly in his cell. Ultimately, we settled on Euclid. It was a bitter compromise, an administrative shrug of the shoulders. It was the Foundation's way of officially stating we do not fully understand the threat. The Euclid classification became our label for the unknown unknowns. It signified that while he was currently contained, we could not be sure he would remain so because we simply did not have enough information to predict his behavior or the full scope of his abilities. It was a confession of our own ignorance codified into our most sacred documents, and it shamed me to sign off on it, though I knew it was the only honest choice. The interviews became our primary and most dangerous source of data. We sent in our best psychologists, our most brilliant biologists, our most steadfast interrogators. The results were always the same. He would deftly and politely turn every question back on the interviewer. When a psychologist asked about his delusions, he would inquire about the pestilence of self-doubt that plagued the doctor's mind. When a biologist questioned his methods, he would lament their blindness to the pestilence of decay inherent in all cellular life. He was a master of psychological deconstruction, peeling back the layers of confidence and certainty from every person who spoke to him. The toll on our staff was immense. Researcher after researcher would request a transfer or a course of amnestics after a few sessions with him. They complained of nightmares, of a creeping paranoia, of beginning to see the world through his eyes. They spoke of looking at their loved ones and feeling a sudden, intrusive urge to check them for signs of the pestilence. He didn't just talk to them, he reprogrammed them, subtly altering their perception of reality until they could no longer trust their own sanity. We were losing our best minds, not to physical attack, but to philosophical erosion. His words were a slow-acting acid that dissolved certainty. The true turning point came with Dr. Glass. He was a brilliant, stable, senior psychologist who had been interviewing 049 for 3 months. He seemed immune to the entity's influence, providing us with the most detailed reports on his mindset we had ever received. Then, one Tuesday, without warning, he breached security. He used his high-level clearance to bypass 3 checkpoints, heading directly for 049's inner containment chamber. He wasn't trying to release him. The security footage showed him on his knees before the final door, weeping and begging for the doctor to come out and cure him. He had been fully converted. He saw the pestilence in himself. That incident sent a shockwave through the entire Foundation. The academic faction lost all credibility overnight. The danger was no longer theoretical. We had hard, terrifying proof that SCP-049's info-hazardous properties were not just a risk, but a near certainty with prolonged exposure. The exterminator faction renewed their calls for his head, but the pragmatist's argument held firm. The risk of a failed termination attempt was still too great. Instead, a new, far more draconian set of protocols was immediately drafted and implemented. All direct verbal interaction with SCP-049 was henceforth forbidden without O5 approval. All research was to be conducted via robotic intermediaries. This event was the cornerstone upon which his modern containment doctrine was built. The failure of our initial approach taught us a crucial lesson. With some anomalies, the greatest threat is not what they can do to your body, but what they can do to your mind. We had been trying to contain a physical entity when we should have been trying to contain a mimetic virus. The new procedures were designed to create an informational vacuum around him, to starve him of the one thing he seemed to feed on, the rational, inquisitive minds of our researchers. We sealed him away behind a wall of silence. His first containment cell had been a simple, reinforced steel room with a triple-paned observation window. After the Dr. Glass incident, we realized how hopelessly naive that was. We began to notice subtle anomalies. Staff in the wing reported persistent feelings of dread and paranoia, even those with no direct contact. We recorded faint, untraceable whispers on the audio sensors, speaking in languages none of our linguists could identify. There was a suspicion, never proven, that his influence could somehow leach through solid matter, that his mere presence was enough to slowly warp the sanity of those nearby. The simple box was not enough. This led to the design of Containment Cell 2.0. It was a box within a box with a vacuum-sealed gap between the inner and outer layers. The air supply was completely independent, recycled within the wing, and never allowed to mix with the rest of the site. All interactions were handled by remote-controlled robotic arms from a separate control room. The observation window was replaced with a series of high-fidelity cameras, their feeds routed through a dozen different filters and time delay to prevent any potential direct memetic transfer. Each new security feature was a scar, a direct response to a terrifying new discovery about his capabilities. It was during this period that the O5 Council made another deeply contentious decision to provide him with biological subjects. The logic was cold and utilitarian. We could learn nothing about his process if he had no material to work on. To understand the cure, we had to witness it. We started with pigs. A remote-controlled cart would deliver a sedated pig to his cell. The doctor, with a quiet nod of what seemed like gratitude, would take the subject and begin his work. We watched in horrified silence as he performed his grotesque surgeries, transforming the animal into a shambling, silent mockery of its former self. The data we gathered was invaluable. It allowed us to analyze the 049-2 transformation process in real time, to study the chemical and biological changes from start to finish. But the ethical cost was immense. I authorized those procedures. I signed the orders that sent living creatures into that room to be desecrated. The next step was even more difficult. Primates. We needed to see how his process affected a creature more biologically similar to humans. The results were the same, only more disturbing, more uncanny. The sight of a reanimated chimpanzee, silent and empty-eyed, following his commands, is an image that has never left me. This led to the establishment of the good behavior clause in his file, a piece of cold-blooded psychological manipulation that I both authored and despised. If SCP-049 remained cooperative, if he complied with our tests and inspections, he would be rewarded with a new biological subject to continue his research. We had created a perverse bargain with an ancient cosmic entity. We were treating him like a lab rat in a Skinner box, rewarding him for compliance with the very thing we found most horrifying. He, in his own unknowable way, seemed to accept this arrangement, so long as he could continue what he called the work. The modern containment cell, the one the Foundation uses today, is the direct descendant of this brutal history. Every single element of the procedure is a legacy of failure and fear. The constant video surveillance is because we fear what he does when unwatched. The remote robotics are because we know what his touch does. The absolute verbal isolation is because we know what his words do to the minds of good men. The on-site, high-temperature incinerator used for the immediate disposal of all 049-2 instances he creates is a testament to the biological horror we witnessed when studying those first animal subjects. We learned to manage him not through understanding, but through a carefully constructed set of stimuli and responses. We became handlers, not researchers. We built a cage not just of steel and concrete, but of routine and protocol. We created a perfect, predictable environment for a perfectly predictable prisoner, all while knowing deep down that the true nature of the entity within the cage was anything but predictable. We were simply managing the observable symptoms of a disease whose true nature was utterly beyond our grasp. The entire containment protocol is an admission of this fact. The search for the origin of his abilities proved to be a complete dead end. We analyzed his robes, which seemed to be composed of solidified keratin and chitin, much like an insect's exoskeleton, and appear to grow directly from his body. We believe the mask is similarly a part of his anatomy, a hardened facial structure of bone and ceramic-like material. He is not wearing a costume. He is the costume. This discovery was profoundly disturbing, as it erased the line between the man and the persona. There was no person under the mask to appeal to. The plague doctor was his one and only absolute state of being. His knowledge of medieval and Renaissance history is flawless. He speaks of events from the 14th and 15th centuries as if he personally witnessed them, providing details that have been subsequently verified by our historians as stunningly accurate and, in some cases, previously unknown. He has, on occasion, lamented the imprecise methods of his colleagues during the Black Death, suggesting he was an active participant. Is he an immortal man from that era? A temporal anomaly? Or something else entirely? An entity that simply adopted the guise of that time because it resonated with its core purpose? We still do not know. The question of the pestilence itself became the subject of Project Damarung, a highly classified, multidisciplinary task force I created to analyze every word he had ever spoken. Their goal was to create a working definition of what he meant by the term. After 5 years of research, they produced a single, terrifying report. They concluded that the pestilence was not a physical or mental illness. It was, in their best estimation, a metaphysical one, a flaw not in the body or the mind, but in the very concept of sentient, self-aware life, a state of being that he, for reasons unknown, perceives as a sickness requiring a cure. According to the Damarung report, the cure is not death. Death is merely a necessary side effect, a clearing of the slate. The true cure is the transformation into a 049-2 instance. In his view, he is not killing his patients. He is elevating them to a new, healthier state of being, a state free from the pestilence of free will, of ambition, of love, of fear, of consciousness itself. He is not a murderer. He is a savior, and the paradise he offers is the utter, silent emptiness of being a biological machine, perfectly ordered and free from the chaos of a soul. The report was so horrifying, I had all but one copy destroyed and sealed the last in my personal vault. This understanding changed everything. We were not containing a killer. We were containing a rival god with a competing definition of life. Our efforts to protect humanity were, from his perspective, a desperate attempt to keep everyone trapped in a state of profound sickness. He sees us as zookeepers, lovingly tending to a species riddled with a fatal disease, and he is the veterinarian who has come to put the animals out of their misery. This reframing of the conflict from one of good versus evil to one of two opposing, irreconcilable definitions of existence is the secret at the heart of his containment. We tried to find a weakness, a vulnerability. We exposed him to extreme temperatures, both high and low. He showed no reaction. We subjected his cell to vacuums, to intense radiation, to sonic frequencies designed to shatter solid rock. He would simply stand in the center of the chaos, perfectly still, waiting patiently for it to end. It seemed that his body, this strange biological construct, was immune to nearly every form of conventional harm we could devise. This resilience only strengthened the pragmatist's argument that any attempt at termination would be foolish, likely to fail, and provoke him unnecessarily. The psychological pressure of containing such an entity began to create fractures within the O5 Council itself. O5-7, a former military general, began to argue that the doctor's continued existence was a standing moral hazard. He claimed that by keeping him alive and even aiding his research with animal subjects, we were complicit in his profane work. He believed we were violating the protect part of our core mission. His arguments grew more fervent, more desperate over time. He had spent too long staring into the abyss of 049's philosophy, and the abyss was staring back. Conversely, 054, our lead scientific mind at the time, became obsessed with the potential knowledge he held. She argued that we were being too cautious, that we needed to risk more to learn more. She proposed a ludicrous plan to allow him to perform his surgery on a brain-dead Class D patient so we could study the effects on a human subject in a controlled environment. The proposal was, of course, vetoed, but it showed how his presence could polarize even the most rational minds, pushing them towards extremes of paranoia or reckless curiosity. He was a wedge that threatened to split the council apart. My role became that of a mediator, a balancer of these extreme factions. I had to rein in the zealots who wanted him destroyed and the obsessive academics who wanted to dissect his every secret, regardless of the cost. I had to constantly advocate for the middle path, absolute containment, limited study, and constant vigilance. It was a tiring, thankless task. I was forced to become the voice of a pragmatism I found morally repugnant, authorizing procedures that turned my stomach, all to prevent the council from tearing itself apart over the question of the man in the beaked mask. His containment became a black hole for resources, an entire site wing, hundreds of dedicated staff, a budget that could fund a small nation, all devoted to keeping one man in one room. The cost was justified by the sheer scale of the potential threat. A breach by SCP-049 was not a simple matter of a monster on the loose. A successful escape could, in theory, trigger a cascade of cures that could lead to a genuine XK-class end-of-the-world scenario, with humanity being systematically and efficiently replaced by his silent, shuffling automata. He was, and is, one of the single greatest threats to human existence we have ever contained. We once tried to communicate with him using pure mathematics, hoping that a universal language could bypass the info-hazardous nature of his speech. We transmitted prime numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, complex geometric proofs. He responded by arranging the bones of one of his animal subjects on the floor of his cell. He created a perfect three-dimensional representation of a fractal pattern, but one with impossible, non-Euclidean geometry that seemed to shift and writhe when you weren't looking directly at it. Our mathematicians were mesmerized and horrified. One had an aneurysm just studying the recordings. We ceased all mathematical communication immediately. The long years of his captivity have done nothing to change him. He shows no signs of boredom, of despair, of anger. His purpose is as unshakable today as it was in that church in Montplot. He is the very definition of patience. He writes in his journals, he tends to his instruments, and he waits. He knows, perhaps with a certainty that we cannot comprehend, that our systems are imperfect, that containment is a temporary state. He is playing a long game, and his lifespan is likely far, far longer than that of our entire civilization. He is not a prisoner biding his time. He is a force of nature, waiting for the weather to change. We have learned a great deal from him, but nothing that has brought us comfort. Every discovery has only served to deepen the mystery and heighten the fear. We learned that his biology is not from our world. We learned that his philosophy is fundamentally inimical to ours. We learned that he is immune to most forms of harm and that his influence can corrupt the strongest mind. We learned enough to know that we are profoundly out of our depth. Our containment of him is not an act of dominance. It is the desperate finger-in-the-dike effort of a lesser life form trying to hold back a cosmic tide. This brings me to the containment doctrine itself, the intricate dance of protocol and procedure we have built around him. It is seen by many in the Foundation as a masterpiece of containment engineering, a perfect system to control an unpredictable anomaly. They are wrong. It is not a masterpiece. It is a monument to our fear. Every rule, every security layer, every triple redundant failsafe is not a sign of our strength, but a memorial to a past failure, a tombstone for a researcher who got too close, a ghost whispering a warning from the past. To understand his containment, you must understand the litany of our mistakes. Let us begin with the cell's construction. The walls are not merely steel and concrete. They are layered with a lead bismuth alloy, not for radiation shielding, but because early experiments showed his ambient anomalous field was subtly dampened by heavy, dense metal. We noticed a 2% decrease in the rate of staff-reported paranoia when we installed the lining, a tiny, almost immeasurable effect, but one we chased at immense cost. We are so desperate for any advantage, no matter how small, that we would rebuild a mountain if it gave us a moment's more peace from him. The constant, low-level white noise broadcast into his cell is another such measure. It was discovered by accident. During a power fluctuation, an audio feedback loop created a steady hum in his cell for several hours. During that time, our anomalous energy sensors detected a significant drop in his ambient output. We theorized that his mind, or whatever passes for it, operates on a frequency that is disrupted by certain sonic patterns. The white noise is now a permanent feature, a constant audio blanket to hopefully muffle his silent, psychic influence. We don't know for certain if it works, but we are too afraid to ever turn it off. Then there is the matter of the lavender. This is a detail you will not find in the official procedures, as it is classified as an environmental quirk, but it is a deliberate and crucial part of the containment. We regularly introduce a potent aerosolized lavender oil into the cell's ventilation system. The historical plague doctors of old filled their masks with aromatic herbs like this, believing it protected them from miasma. We tried it on a whim, an act of historical desperation. To our astonishment, it has a measurable, albeit minuscule, calming effect on him. It reduces his ambulatory pattern, and he seems less attentive. We have no scientific basis for why it works. It is a superstitious ritual, a piece of folklore we practice because we are too afraid not to. The brutality of our doctrine is best exemplified by Protocol Coda 7. This is an unspoken, unwritten rule, known only to the site director and the security chief of the wing. In the event of a minor breach where SCP-049 has a staff member cornered, a Class D prisoner from an adjacent holding block is to be remotely released into the corridor. The logic is as simple as it is monstrous: to provide a more convenient, preferable target to distract the doctor with a new patient, buying the staff member precious seconds to escape. We sacrifice a life we have deemed worthless to save one we consider valuable. It is the cold, hard calculus of our mission in its most naked form. His journals are another critical and paradoxical element of his containment. We have, on 2 occasions, attempted to remove them from his cell for study. Both attempts were failures. The moment a robotic arm touched the books, he ceased all movement, and his ambient, anomalous energy readings spiked to dangerous, unprecedented levels. The very structure of the cell began to groan and resonate. He did not become violent, he simply became present in a way that threatened reality itself. We now consider the journals to be a part of his anomalous matrix. We cannot take them. They are his pacifier, and the mystery of what he writes within them remains a source of constant, gnawing dread. There is a strict and absolute prohibition on any mirrored or highly reflective surfaces within his wing. This rule was written after a single, bizarre incident. A researcher accidentally left a polished stainless steel tray in the transfer airlock. SCP-049 caught sight of his own reflection in it. He stopped moving and stood perfectly still for 17 hours, staring at his own image. Audio sensors picked up him whispering a single word over and over again, a word our linguists have never been able to translate. After he finally moved, we found that his baseline anomalous energy signature had permanently and subtly changed. We do not know what this self-reflection triggered in him, and we have no intention of ever finding out. The final seal on his cell is a lock of my own design, born from the paranoia of the Dr. Glass incident. It is not a single lock, but a cascade of interlocking mechanisms that cannot be opened without the simultaneous, coordinated action of 3 separate O5 level personnel. One must be on site, one at our primary command hub, and one at a secure, off-world location. Each turns a key at the same instant. This procedure makes an unauthorized opening of his cell by a single compromised individual, no matter how highly placed, a logistical impossibility. It is the final brick in the wall we have built around him, a wall made of our fear, our failures, and our own compromised humanity. Every one of these procedures, every layer of his containment is a scar, a lesson learned in blood or terror. The doctrine is not a work of genius, it is a tapestry of our desperation woven over decades. We do not control him. We have simply learned through painful trial and error how to build a cage that is precisely shaped to the contours of our own ignorance. We manage his presence, but we do not, and I suspect we never will truly understand it. The greatest danger is that this intricate system has created a false sense of security among the current generation of staff. They follow the rules without knowing the horrifying reasons they were written. They do not know the true cost of the knowledge we have gleaned. They read the sanitized reports on the 0492 instances, but they do not see the raw footage of the transformations. They do not hear the audio logs of the researchers who slowly lost their mind. They do not have to sit with the ghosts of Moreau and Arnaud and the forgotten villagers of Montplot. They see a contained anomaly, a problem that has been solved. They do not see the sentient philosophical plague that sits patiently in that room, waiting for a single crack in our resolve, a single moment of weakness to resume its great and terrible work. This is the legacy I leave to my successor, not a solved problem, but a managed crisis, a holding action against an inevitable tide. To believe anything else is to fall into the same trap of hubris that I did in my youth. You must understand that containing SCP-049 is not a science. It is a priesthood. It is a set of sacred rituals that must be performed without question, not because we understand the gods we are appeasing, but because we have seen what happens when the rituals fail. Your most important job is not to study him, but to ensure that this priesthood never forgets the meaning behind its catechism of fear. The wider implications of his existence are something I have spent the latter half of my life contemplating. He represents a potential future for humanity, a cure for the chaotic, painful, beautiful mess of our existence. I fear that he is not just a monster to be fought, but a temptation to be resisted. What happens when humanity faces a true existential threat, a K-class scenario from which there is no escape? What happens when annihilation is the only other option on the table? In a moment of ultimate despair, would we, as a species, choose the doctor's silent, empty salvation over utter extinction? I fear the answer is yes. This fear is why the emergency protocols for an 049 breach are the most extreme in the entire Foundation arsenal. They are designed not just to recontain him, but to erase any trace of his work at any cost. The first layer of this is Protocol Somnus. In the event of a confirmed breach from his containment wing, the entire sector is automatically and irrevocably flooded with a proprietary neurotoxin. It does not merely kill, it is an enzymatic agent that instantly liquefies all nervous tissue from the brain to the spinal cord. It ensures that there is nothing left for him to cure, nothing to reanimate. It is a scorched earth policy for the soul. Should he breach the site itself and escape into a populated area, the last light contingency is activated. This is a matter for the O5 Council alone. We would deploy a fuel-air explosive delivered by a stealth drone to incinerate the entire affected area. The acceptable loss of civilian life is calculated in the low tens of thousands. We would then use the full power of the Foundation's global influence to manufacture a cover story, a terrorist attack, a catastrophic industrial accident, to explain the crater where a town used to be. I have had to run the simulations for this scenario. I pray no one ever has to give the final order, but there is one protocol that lies beyond even that. A final, desperate measure for a scenario where he has breached containment and his cure is spreading in a chain reaction we cannot stop through conventional or even nuclear means. It is designated Protocol Damarung Gauge. It is the most terrible idea we have ever conceived. It does not target SCP-049 himself. It targets humanity. We would release a tailored, airborne virus of our own design, one that would render human biology permanently and fundamentally incompatible with the Doctor's transformation process. It would save our species from his cure, but at a cost that is almost unthinkable. The cost of Protocol Damarung Gauge is the future of our species. The virus, in rewriting our biology to grant us immunity to his touch, would also induce near total sterility in 98% of the surviving population. Humanity would be saved from his clutches, but we would be rendered a dead-end species, destined to slowly fade into extinction over a few generations. It is a choice to save the book of humanity by burning its final pages, a choice to preserve our soul, our consciousness, our chaotic freedom by sacrificing our ability to continue. It is the ultimate expression of our defiance against his definition of life. To enact Protocol Damarung, Gauge requires a unanimous vote of the 13 members of the O5 Council. In the 50 years since its conception, it has been brought to a vote 3 times during our worst containment failure simulation. Each time, the vote was 12 in favor and 1 against. That one dissenting vote, the single vote holding back the self-imposed twilight of our species, has always been mine. I could never bring myself to do it. I could never be the one to agree that our extinction was preferable. I always held out the foolish, desperate hope that there could be another way. My successor may not be so sentimental, and this brings me to my final confession, my deepest, most personal fear. It is not that SCP-049 is a liar or a madman. It is the secret, gnawing terror that he is telling the absolute truth, that the pestilence is real, a fundamental flaw in the fabric of our being, a sickness so pervasive that we are incapable of perceiving it, like a fish that does not know it is wet. My relentless drive to study him, my insistence on keeping him alive against all reason, was never born of pure scientific curiosity. It was a desperate, selfish need to understand the sickness that I sometimes feel inside my own soul and that I see raging in the heart of all mankind. My final warning to you, whoever you are, who sits in this chair after I am gone, is this: do not repeat my mistake. Do not fall prey to the sin of intellectual pride. Do not believe that you can understand him or reason with him or outsmart him. He is not a problem to be solved. He is a fundamental constant of the universe, like gravity or the speed of light. Your only job is to maintain the walls we have built. Your only duty is to uphold the rituals of containment. Do not seek dialogue. Do not seek answers. Some doors are meant to remain closed forever. His is one of them. There is one more secret, one last piece of the puzzle that I have never shared with anyone. Dr. Arnold, my friend, the leader of that first doomed expedition, his last transmission, the one where he whispered about the pestilence being inside us, was not cut off by an attack. The full, unedited recording, which I have kept hidden for 60 years, continues for another 10 seconds. After his whisper of terror, there is a pause, and then his tone changes. It becomes calm, serene. His final words were not a scream. They were, "It's beautiful. I see it now. Make me well." He did not flee. He walked towards the cure. He chose it. This secret has been my own personal ghost. The knowledge that my friend, one of the most rational men I ever knew, embraced the doctor's philosophy in his final moments. Did he break, or did he see a truth that I am too cowardly to face? This question has been the engine of my obsession, the true source of my lifelong, terrified fascination with SCP-049. I had to know if my friend died a victim or if he died a convert, and after all these years, I am still no closer to an answer. I have only succeeded in building a prison around my own doubt, and now I feel it myself, the sickness of my own body, the decay of age, the fading of the mind, the slow, inexorable march towards the void, the pestilence of mortality, and in the quietest hours of the night, a terrible, intrusive thought sometimes comes to me, a whisper that sounds a little like Arnold's, a thought that asks if the doctor's touch is truly a curse or if it is a mercy, a final, perfect peace from the chaos of being human, from the pain of memory and the fear of oblivion. It is a terrifying question to ask oneself at the end of a long life spent fighting monsters. That is why I am ending this recording. I am old, I am tired, and the walls of my own certainty have crumbled. For decades, I have kept something from the evidence locker of the Montplo incident, a single sealed vial of the fluid the doctor uses to effect his cure. I told myself it was for research, a final sample to be studied, but that was another lie. It has been my own personal contingency, a final option, a question sealed in glass. I will sit here now in the silence, and I will look at this vial, and I will contemplate the nature of the pestilence and the definition of a cure. The rest is silence.